location of your emergency?
Something is happening. Something happened in our house. We don't know what.
A knife sheath left behind at the scene. No fingerprints on it, but something else. Something invisible to the eye, invisible to the killer, and invisible to almost everyone who'd later cover this case on TV. That single piece of evidence is the reason this video exists. Not because it's gruesome, it isn't going to be. Because it's the most important 6 weeks of forensic and digital detective work in a modern American murder case. And most true crime coverage skips straight past it to get to the arrest. If you watched the Netflix documentary, you got the emotional story, the grief, the community, the trial that almost happened. What you didn't get is how investigators actually built an unbreakable case out of a plate number, a DNA fragment smaller than a grain of salt, and a public genealogy database never designed to catch killers. That's this video. I'm not here to guess what happened before a jury does. I'm here to make sure you actually understand what's known so far. Moscow is a small university town in northern Idaho, home to the University of Idaho and about 10,000 students. In the early hours of November 13, 2022, 4 of those students were killed inside an off-campus rental home a short walk from campus. Madison Mogan, 21. Kaylee Goncalves, 21. Xanaker Nodal, 20. Ethan Chapin, 20. 2 roommates were in the house at the time and survived. We're not gonna walk through the attack itself. That's not what this video is for, and honestly, it's not the part of this case that actually explains how it got solved. What matters for our purposes is what didn't happen. No forced entry that investigators could point to publicly. No witnesses who saw a stranger. And for weeks, no named suspect. Moscow hadn't had a homicide in years. The department investigating this had never handled anything close to this scale. That gap, 6 weeks of a small town, knowing a quadruple killer was still out there, is why this case became a national story before it became a legal one. But behind the scenes, the actual break in the case had already started, and it didn't come from a tip line. This is the part almost every mainstream retelling gets vague about, and it's actually the most important investigative development in unsolved casework in the last decade. So let's actually explain it, not just name drop it. Forensic genetic genealogy doesn't search a criminal database. It doesn't look you up by name. What it does is compare a crime scene DNA profile against public consumer genealogy databases. The same kind of databases people use to build family trees or find long-lost relatives. Specifically the ones that allow law enforcement uploads under their terms of service. Most notably, GetMatch. Here's the actual mechanic. Your DNA profile doesn't need to be in the database for this to work. A distant cousin's does. If a third or fourth cousin of the suspect has ever uploaded their DNA to one of these sites, investigators can build outward from that partial match. Construct a family tree branch by branch, using public records, obituaries, and census data, until the branches narrow down to one person whose age, location, and background fit. At the scene, investigators recovered a knife sheath, the leather holster a folding or fixed blade knife would sit in, left behind, seemingly overlooked in a chaotic exit. No weapon, just the sheath. Here's the part that doesn't make it into most retellings. How do you get usable DNA off a piece of leather that's been touched, maybe for a second, months, or years before the crime? The answer is touch DNA, also called trace DNA. It's not blood, saliva, or anything visible. It's skin cells, a handful of them, transferred just by contact, picking something up, buckling a strap, gripping a handle. For decades, this kind of sample was considered too degraded and too minimal to work with reliably. Advances in amplification technology over the last 10 to 15 years changed that. labs can now take a sample with only a few dozen cells and build a usable genetic profile from it. That's what happened here. The Idaho State Lab pulled a male DNA profile off the sheath's snap button. And a profile alone doesn't catch anyone. A profile is just a string of genetic markers sitting in a database with no name attached. This is the part almost every mainstream retelling gets vague about, and it's actually the most important investigative development in unsolved casework in the last decade. So let's actually explain it, not just name drop it. Forensic genetic genealogy doesn't search a criminal database. It doesn't look you up by name. What it does is compare a crime scene DNA profile against public, consumer genealogy databases. The same kind of databases people use to build family trees or find long-lost relatives. Specifically the ones that allow law enforcement uploads under their terms of service. Most notably, GetMatch. Here's the actual mechanic. Your DNA profile doesn't need to be in the database for this to work. A distant cousin's does. If a third or fourth cousin of the suspect has ever uploaded their DNA to one of these sites, investigators can build outward from that partial match. Construct a family tree branch by branch, using public records, obituaries, and census data, until the branches narrow down to one person whose age, location, and background fit. This technique is the same one that identified the Golden State Killer in 2018, and it's been used in dozens of cold cases since. In this case, investigators used it to build a family tree that eventually pointed toward the Kohberger family, and specifically toward a 28-year-old criminology PhD student named Bryan Kohberger, a student at Washington State University, just across the state line in Pullman, less than 10 miles from the crime scene. Genetic genealogy on its own isn't courtroom-ready evidence in most cases. It's an investigative lead, a way to generate a name. Once investigators had that name, they needed to confirm it the traditional way, get a direct DNA sample from Kohberger himself, and compare it to the sheath profile. They got that sample from trash collected at his parents' home in Pennsylvania, where he'd gone for winter break. The comparison came back as what prosecutors called a statistical match, meaning the profile from the sheath was consistent with Kohberger's DNA at a scientifically significant threshold, not just similar to it. That's genealogy plus traditional forensics working together. One gives you the name, the other proves it. DNA wasn't the only thread. While the genealogy work was happening, a separate team was reconstructing Kohberger's movements using cell tower data and surveillance footage. The kind of digital breadcrumb trail that's become standard in major cases, but rarely gets explained clearly. Cell tower data doesn't track your phone through GPS in real time, the way people assume. It works by recording which cell tower your phone connects to, and roughly how strong that connection is, each time it pings for calls, texts, or background app data. That gives investigators a rough physical path over time. Not exact coordinates, but a corridor of movement. Using this method, investigators say Kohberger's phone connected to towers near the crime scene in the hours around the murders, despite his phone having largely gone dark, no connections, for a stretch of time that lined up with the window of the killings. That gap is significant to investigators for exactly the same reasons silence in a phone record usually is. Phones that are normally active go dark, either because they're off, in airplane mode, or somewhere with no service. Separately, surveillance video was used to place a white Hyundai Elantra, the same model and color as Kohberger's registered vehicle, driving in and around the area in the hours before and after the killings. Investigators cross-referenced that footage against Washington State University parking and traffic camera systems, since Kohberger's own car had already been logged on campus systems as a registered vehicle. This is the actual reason this case became effectively unwinnable for the defense at trial. Not one strong piece of evidence, but 3 separate independently built trails, forensic, digital, and vehicular, that all converged on the same person without depending on each other. That's the kind of case that ends in a plea deal, and it's exactly what happened here. In July 2025, weeks before opening statements were set to begin, Kohberger accepted a plea agreement. Guilty on all counts. 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary, in exchange for prosecutors taking the death penalty off the table. A lot of viewers hear plea deal in a case this strong and assume it means the prosecution wasn't confident. It's almost always the opposite. Prosecutors offer deals in overwhelming cases specifically because they're overwhelming. A guaranteed conviction with guaranteed life sentences removes any risk of appeal-driven reversal, removes the re-traumatization of victims' families sitting through a trial, and removes the years-long appellate process that death penalty cases almost always trigger. A death sentence in the U.S. isn't the end of a case. It's usually the start of a decade-plus of automatic appeals. By taking death off the table, in exchange for a guilty plea and a waiver of appeal rights, prosecutors traded the possibility of execution for the certainty that Kohberger would never leave prison, with no chance of a retrial down the line. At the hearing where the plea was entered, Judge Stephen Hippler walked through the agreement in detail, and prosecutor Bill Thompson laid out the evidence on the record. The DNA match, the cell data, the vehicle footage, the same 3 trails we just walked through, now read into the court record as the factual basis for the plea. Under oath, Kohberger confirmed he understood the charges and the agreement, and confirmed that no one had made him any promises or forced him into it. When the judge asked him directly whether he was pleading guilty because he was in fact guilty, he answered yes. He offered no explanation for why. He never has. At sentencing that July, when given the chance to address the court, he responded only that he respectfully declined. At sentencing, the court heard impact statements from the victims' families, before Judge Hippler handed down 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 10 years for the burglary count. Consecutive, not concurrent, meaning the sentences stack rather than run at the same time. A largely symbolic distinction for someone already facing life without parole, but a legally and emotionally significant one for the families. The judge's closing remarks were pointed. He told Kohberger, in effect, that his moment of public notoriety was now over, and that what remained was simply time served in confinement. We'll paraphrase rather than quote him directly, but the sentiment was clear. This was the court closing the book, not opening one. For a while, that appeared to be the end of the legal story. Here's what's genuinely unresolved, and what separates this case from a tidy ending: motive. Kohberger has never offered one. Not to investigators, not in court, not to his own defense team as far as has been made public. Prosecutors themselves have said publicly they don't expect that to ever change. That absence matters, and we're going to caveat this clearly, rather than let it slide. Any theory you've heard online, an obsession with true crime, a fixation on one of the victims, some kind of academic curiosity about the criminal mind given his field of study. None of that has been confirmed by prosecutors, by the defense, or by the court. It's speculation. And speculation is exactly what we don't do here. The honest answer is that nobody outside Kohberger himself knows. What we can say with confidence is everything that got him caught. And that's worth sitting with for a second, because it's the actual takeaway of this case. He wasn't caught by a confession, a witness, or a mistake at the scene. He was caught by the accumulation of forensic science and digital record-keeping that simply didn't exist as tools 20 years ago. Every episode of this series closes on the same question. Was there a moment where this was preventable? For a lot of cases we cover, the answer involves a missed report, a database gap, a warning that went nowhere. We're not going to force that narrative onto this case, because it wouldn't be honest. There's no evidence of a prior report on Kohberger, no known red flag anyone in his life or in law enforcement ignored, no documented history that should have raised alarm before November 13th. What there is something stranger and more specific. 2 documented moments where law enforcement was physically in front of him, weeks and then a month before the murders, and had no reason on earth to know what they were looking at. Nearly 3 months before the murders, Kohberger was pulled over in Latah County, the same county Moscow sits in, for driving 42 in a 35 zone. Body camera footage, released after his conviction, shows an unremarkable stop. He admitted he wasn't wearing his seatbelt, told the officer he was just being straightforward with her, and was let go with a warning and a small citation. Then, a month before the murders, a Washington State University campus officer pulled him over near his own school for running a red light. The stop lasted several minutes. He was, by the officer's account, unusually talkative, asking a string of questions about the law itself, then apologizing for asking too many. He was let go with a warning again. Both stops put an officer directly in front of the exact car that would later be tied to the crime scene, run his plate through the system, and log his information, weeks before there was a crime to connect it to. There was nothing to catch. No alert existed because no crime had happened yet. It's not a failure in the sense of a missed opportunity. It's something closer to a documented near touch, on record before anyone knew it would matter. The stranger postscript. A month after the murders, driving cross-country with his father to Pennsylvania for winter break, Kohberger was pulled over twice within 10 minutes by 2 separate Indiana agencies, both times for following another vehicle too closely. Both agencies later confirmed, on the record, that neither had any information at the time linking his car, his plate, or his description to the Idaho case. He was let go with verbal warnings both times, roughly 2 weeks before his arrest. So here's the honest version of this segment, and we think it's actually more unsettling than a missed red flag would be. There was no failure point. 3 separate police contacts in 3 different states with 3 different officers, and at no point did any of them have a piece of information that would have let them connect Bryan Kohberger to anything. The system worked exactly as it was supposed to. Officers can't flag a car for a crime that in 2 of the 3 stops hadn't happened yet, and in the 3rd hadn't yet been publicly linked to that vehicle. The uncomfortable takeaway isn't that someone failed to stop him. It's that under the rules our legal system runs on, the ones that also protect everyone who isn't a killer from being pulled over and interrogated on a hunch, there was no way for anyone to catch him earlier than the DNA and the digital trail eventually did. That's not a comforting closing point, but it's the true one, and on this channel, true is the only version we do. We'll keep following this the same way we always do, carefully and only with what's actually been proven.
How you feeling?